Hello and welcome to Indie Business Radio for Monday, November 24th, 2008. I'm your host, Donna Maria, and you have arrived at the one place where we empower you to enjoy your life, build your business, and have your way. Today's media partner is elementsbathandbody.com, your home for wholesale soap making and toiletry supplies. Get affordable packaging, ingredients, and accessories, whether you're a soap maker, candle maker, crafter, or hobbyist. There's special pricing that applies for a limited time only for readers of my newsletter. So head on over to indiebeautynetwork.com and click on the link for newsletter to get the discount code. We'll see you at elementsbathandbody.com. Well, you know, we women are known the world over for our emotions. Whether or not our reputation is deserved or just another stereotypical myth we have to overcome, the fact is that women seem to approach not just life, but also business differently than men. At least that's what today's guest says. Her name is Karin Abarbanel. She runs a marketing communications firm and served as the spokesperson for Avon's Corporation to Cottage initiative. She is the author of How to Succeed on Your Own and speaks frequently about entrepreneurial women and small business trends. Karin lives in Montclair, New Jersey, and she joins us from there today. Welcome to the show, Karin.
Hi, great to be here. Thank you.
Karin is also the co-author with Bruce Freeman of a brand new book called Birthing the Elephant, The Woman's Go-For-It Guide to Overcoming the Big Challenges of Launching a Business. And hey, all my cosmetics indies out there, my indie beauties, there's a foreword in this book by Bobby Brown, who, of course, is a well-known cosmetics manufacturer and personality. Karin, so, let's get the scoop here. How did you sort of move from what at some point must have been a traditional career into doing all this writing and speaking? Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, I had my own, like everyone, as everyone does, I had my own entrepreneurial journey going on. I worked for about 12 years for a major consulting firm. I was doing marketing. And then, they downsized the marketing group. So I was in a situation where, I had to decide, did I want to go out and look for another marketing job or launch a home-based business? And at the time, I had a little boy who's now 18, so this is a while ago, but he was a baby. And, I really made a decision that I hadn't developed a lot of background. I'd done the corporate thing, and I wanted to really take the background that I created, the marketing expertise, and build it into a home-based business because I really wanted the flexibility of being at home with my son, and I thought it really lent itself, the kind of work that I did. And, of course, this was actually way before the Internet. But I launched a pretty successful business. Actually, my former employer is still a client of mine, so I've had a very good relationship with them over the years, and I've, branched out and had quite a number of blue-chip clients, actually, doing various marketing projects. But at a certain point, actually, when my son was a baby, I started talking with other women about making this transition from employee to entrepreneur. Because for me, it was very difficult. I found it kind of hard. I had been, working for a company where I had a lot of structure. I had an office. I had a title. I had a network of contacts. And suddenly, I was on my own, sitting at home, trying to figure out, well, how do I go out and get clients? How do I do this? And it was very sort of emotionally challenging for me. So actually, after talking to a number of women and realizing this was an issue, this whole issue of sort of reshaping your identity, I co-authored, I went on to write a book called How to Succeed on Your Own, which addressed some of these issues about, making this transition. And then we can fast forward to, the kind of, more recent time, and I really hooked up with my co-author, Bruce Freeman. We started talking about working on something together because our backgrounds were very simpatico. And, basically looking at the Internet and the surge, the huge numbers of women going into small businesses, it really seemed that the time was ripe to do something that was even more substantial, looking at this whole issue of making this transition from employee to entrepreneur, the emotional aspects of kind of reshaping your identity, and just, how you stay the course when you have the ups and downs of launching a business. so we really teamed up, and that's how Birthing the Elephant came to be written. But it really, the whole book, as many books do, grew out of my own personal experience and talking with people around me who were dealing with the same issues.
If you have a question for Karin about birthing your elephant, please give us a call, 800-773-0355. Now, Karin, I have to ask you, as a business writer, how this book actually came to be, because there are so many how-to business books out there. Tell us a little bit about how you felt there was a need for this particular book and how it's different from what's already out there.
Okay, sure. You're right, there are a ton of books out there. When we were thinking about putting together a proposal and going to a publisher with the book, and, there's just a lot out there. But most of the books that are out there, if you looked at the small business guides, if you went to a bookstore or whatever and just looked at them, most of them deal with what we call the 3 M's. They're really about money, marketing, and management. But there's really a 4th M, I believe, that really underlies all of those things. And that 4th M is really motivation. It's how do you find the staying power, just the emotional stamina to kind of keep going on that rocky road to launching a business. And as Bruce and I were, talking about what we wanted to do, it became very clear that this was still, it was kind of an issue I had touched on in my early book, but it became very clear that this was really a huge area. And he could connect to it, interestingly enough, even as a male, small business owner, the ups and downs. And we started looking, and we really couldn't find anything. This whole area of the emotional kind of component of launching, the emotional dimension, was just really not being explored. And so we said, you know what, there's a book here, And so we, started developing it, and that's really how the book came about.
Right. So there, that's such a good overview of how it sort of fits a niche, and I'm glad that you shared that, because I really like to be able to let our listeners know, how is this particular book and how are this author's ideas different from what's out there. So that was a really good overview. And, Karin, I have to say that because most of my listeners are women who at one point were in the position that you were in, and that I was in a full-time job, with all the benefits and all the structure. And we have to transition out of that. And, Karin, that is a very emotional experience.
It is. That's how I felt about it, Donna Maria, and it is true. And, the thing is that women really get that. It's probably emotional for men, too, when it comes right down to it. You're dealing with financial anxiety and image anxiety and, all kinds of issues and fear of launching. And many of these issues are the same, but women there's just so much more willing to recognize and to acknowledge, these are big issues, and they can sabotage your startup if you don't deal with them. So they just totally get it. And when we went out and were interviewing women for the book, it was wonderful. We had fantastic interviews, and women especially, they're so willing to share, the smart things that they did, the mistakes they made, For other women, they're just very giving in that way. And, when we started talking about this, everybody knew exactly what we were talking about, and they loved it. We had fantastic interviews because no one was really talking about these issues with them. They were talking about the business plan and they weren't talking about, well, how did you handle the fear, or how did you, deal with that first rejection that you got, How did you keep going when everybody told you this business idea doesn't make sense, There's so many emotional issues that surface, and they can really, drag you down. And, it's very important to we all know, to stay up, to keep yourself motivated, to be able to handle those obstacles when you hit them. And, of course, you will. Anyone who's launched will tell you. They all come at different times and in different forms, but everybody who's launched, no one has, a really straight road.
Well, let's talk about one of those obstacles, and you mentioned it, and that's fear. I Twitter quite frequently at Indie Business on Twitter.com, and I posed this question over the weekend: what is it that keeps people from maximizing their potential in business? Is it more fear, or is it more lack of money? And hands down, the answer was fear. And these were mostly women responding to me, although a couple men said the same thing. So, Karin, tell us a little bit about your exploration of that issue, because I think that really is kind of what sabotages a lot of people. How do they handle that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a big issue. And I will say that just about everyone, when you discuss in the course of an interview, you say, well, when you started, did you, kind of feel fearful about it? And when you launched, and, 9 out of 10 people will really say, yes, I felt it. But the issue is, how do you sort of manage that fear? And most of the people will say, the fear doesn't go away, and it's something you have to deal with, and you kind of have to, you can use fear to sort of energize you and to push you forward. And that's how a lot of people dealt with it. They said, you know what, it's sort of that feeling, you've heard the title of that book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And everybody just said, basically, I had fear. I realized it wasn't going to go away. There wasn't a way I could banish the fear, so I needed to learn how to manage it, and I made a decision not to let it stop me. And there's this idea also that, if you leap, the net will appear. And a lot of people said, I just felt at a certain point, for whatever reason, and for many people it's different what that trigger is, and often it's a combination of things that sort of pushes you into the entrepreneurial zone. But whatever it was, at a certain point they just felt impelled to go forward. And I think it's, the whole issue of listening to yourself, going with something that you feel, again, we talk in the book a lot about finding something as your business venture that you feel totally passionate about, and that's so critical because you're going to be spending a lot of time doing it. And again, you're going to maybe face definitely face a lot of obstacles. So you need to find something that you feel so passionate about and love, that will allow you to weather all of that and to overcome the fear. But I was talking to one of the women that we interviewed, has been in business for many years. She launched on about $1,000 of her own money. She now has a business that's $20 million in IT, very successful. And she said, I still feel fearful. Mm-hmm. I still feel fearful. But she said, I don't, let the fear stop me. She said, I think the fear at this stage really gives me an edge because I'm not complacent. I don't take things for granted. So she sort of channels her fear into creative energy to move forward. And that's how a lot of people dealt with it. But one woman told me very, honestly, she said, every morning I get up and I'm fearful and I'm in the shower and for about 15 minutes I allow myself to be fearful. And then she said, I get on with my day. I need to build my business.
Point. You got to move on. I'm looking at one of the tweets in response to my question who said, I would say pretty much the biggest fear I ever had was my husband being unemployed. It happened, and then we got past it and started our business. It's like, the worst fear came to fruition, and it was, as you said, you just move on. And so that's a good way to describe it. Now, Karin, one of the things you did in your book that's such a great inclusion is you interviewed several business owners and shared a little bit about how they started their business. And so we want to definitely take some time and talk with you about some of those people, especially the woman that you found who started Style Sticks. Tell us about her story.
Oh, that was so interesting. Actually, she came through, many of the people that we interviewed in the book actually came through my co-author, Bruce Freeman. He has a small business column called Ask the Small Business Professor. And a lot of the people that we interviewed came through his column. He had sort of interviewed them for the column. And then we went back and said, this sounds like an interesting person. But he had actually, I believe, interviewed Kathy Kearns. And she had a really, interesting and somewhat unusual story. She was involved in marketing in the hospitality industry. She had a very high-powered job. And then in her late 30s, sadly, she was diagnosed with muscular sclerosis, MS. And she was able to continue working in her corporate job for a while, but she began to have some really pretty serious symptoms. I mean, it affected her vision, her mobility. She ended up having to use a cane at work. And in any case, she had a new boss who came in, and basically he really wasn't as understanding of her situation as her previous boss, so she decided to leave. She launched one small business which didn't work out, but then she got the idea. I mean, it's a wonderful story, very inspiring in terms of turning a liability into an asset. She herself was using a cane, and she got the idea to create a more stylish cane, a walking stick that would be helpful for people who needed help, but that would be much more fashionable and could be sort of customized using colors and different things. So she went to a manufacturer and worked with him to create kind of a lucite stick that into which as I understand it, she sort of inserts, materials that create a very colorful kind of walking stick. And she did a couple of prototypes. She was at a party. Joan Rivers saw it and sort of basically grabbed the cane from her and said, gee, I could use one of these. And so she really felt she had a great idea. But she ended up, going to a manufacturer, figuring out how to manufacture it, and she launched an internet-based business, and she operates it out of her home in Florida. And so it really works well for her because it allows her, because she's home-based, to kind of manage her symptoms and to, sell these canes all over the world and to run a very efficient kind of lean business. So she was a very inspiring story, we thought. So we wanted to include her in the book, and we actually gave, I think there are a couple of resources for people because, frankly, there are many people who've got various medical problems.
That is so true, and your book is filled with these kinds of interesting stories, and we're going to come back after our break and talk about a little bit, Karin, about the lessons that we can learn from some of the people that you interviewed for your book, Birthing the Elephant. This is Indie Business Radio. I'm your host, Donna Maria. Don't touch that mouse. We'll be right back with our guest.
Why is everyone listening to GlobalTalkRadio.com? Because it's the future of talk radio. Every day, more and more people are finding Internet radio as not just an alternative media, but as a replacement to traditional AM and FM broadcast stations. Internet radio offers a wider variety of programs, convenient on-demand listening that meets your schedule, and fewer commercial interruptions. And GlobalTalkRadio.com is already leading the way by matching this content with a highly targeted Internet audience. GlobalTalkRadio.com offers its listeners one of the widest programming varieties on the Internet, from business and finance to self-improvement, paranormal, health, literature, romance, politics, and more. There are also opportunities for prospective hosts who would like to host their own weekly or one-time talk shows. Want to learn more? Check us out at www.globaltalkradio.com and see the future of talk radio today.
Welcome back to Indie Business Radio. I'm here with my guest, Karin Abarbanel. She is the co-author of Birthing the Elephant, the Woman's Go-For-It Guide to Overcoming the Big Challenges of Launching a Business. And before we took a break, Karin was telling us the inspirational story of a woman who was diagnosed with an illness and essentially, for all practical purposes, just took it and turned it into a business. I love that story. So, Karin, one of the things that we talked about earlier in the show was the fact that you co-authored this book with a business expert, another business expert who happens to be a male. And this book is aimed squarely at women.
Oh, yeah.
A little bit about what it was like to work with Bruce on a book that was geared towards women. Was he able to offer you some interesting insights?
Oh, absolutely. Actually, we really had a lot of fun. I mean, we came together. We had been talking about, doing something together for a while because we were just very simpatico. And so this worked out really, really well. But I really enjoyed it. First of all, Bruce, brought a lot to the table. He started his own PR business years ago, sort of around the time I did, and built it up. And he was in a similar situation. Basically, he was fired from a job, and he had to make a decision, Do I want to go back and look for another job, or do I sort of want to control my destiny? And he talked a lot, and it was interesting. He added a lot to the book. He talked a lot about how at a certain point he said, you know what, I'd rather be my own boss. When you're your own boss, no one can fire you again. And he said, I have a family. At the point, he had 2 young daughters. He said, you know, I don't want to be in the position of being at the mercy of someone who can axe me again or the market doesn't work well. He said, I'd rather take control of my own future and launch a business. And we talked a lot about that, and that's sort of where the Design Your Destiny title for the first chapter came out, because he just really had a strong sense of that. And then, as I said, because he had a small business column, he had interviewed a lot of the people, you know, just for a very short interview that we eventually went back to, who made wonderful interviews in the book. And we would, you know, he was a great, you know, we would be sounding boards for each other. And he, you know, he brought an interesting perspective. But he also said, you know, I have 2 daughters. And he said, and, you know, I want them to grow up to be independent. They're starting, one of them's in college. He said, you know, I want them to have the resources to be, you know, become entrepreneurs if that's the way they want to go. And I want them to be financially independent no matter how they partner up or marry. I want to feel, you know, that they have that option. So he was very supportive of the whole idea of, you know, writing a book for women entrepreneurs. And so it really worked out well. It was a very fruitful combination. We had a lot of fun. We bounced things off of each other. He had a good perspective, and he's got tremendous, you know, public relations background, which is great for marketing the book. So it was a good combo.
Now, one of the things that your book includes are 10 pitfalls that we should avoid. And we talked a little bit about fear a little bit earlier on, although that's not specifically one of them here. But one of them does have to do with the other issue we mentioned briefly, and that was finances. Spending money for all the wrong reasons. So, Karin, tell us a little bit about what you discovered, because once you get past that fear, assuming you have a good business idea, a good solid product or service to sell, and a niche, what is it about the money that stumps people? Because that's a huge issue. I get that all the time when I ask people, how's business going? I don't get fear back unless I ask about it, but I do get, you know what, I'm struggling financially, I'm running out of money, and I don't know what to do.
Yeah. I mean, we all know that financing is an economic issue, but it's hugely emotional, whether it's in our relationships with other, you know, people or, you know, family issues around money. It's a big emotional trigger, and it's the same in launching a business as it is elsewhere in your life. And it's really important, I think, to recognize that. We dealt with the issue of money, you know, again, sort of from the psychological and emotional dimension. But the chapter title of the book that focused squarely on money, although we dealt with it in different, you know, ways throughout the book, but the chapter, we called it Substitute Brains for Bucks. I think that was very conscious on our part, because really a lot when we were interviewing a lot of the women that we spoke to, this issue came up again and again of this idea of substituting kind of creativity for cash.
And what do you mean by that, Karin? I'm glad you mentioned that particular chapter.
Right.
When I was looking at the book, I forgot about that. That's it. How do you deal with that issue, and where do you get this kind of creativity from?
Right. I mean, I think what we found when we were talking to women was very interesting, was that almost when they made the decision to launch, you could say it almost ignited their ingenuity. You know, it just brought them to a place where they just were very committed to making their business work, and they became very creative about figuring out ways to launch their business in a lean way. And let me give you some examples, because that will help. I mean, first of all, I think the issue is a lean launch is always a smart idea. And for women, we all know, and it's still true, women tend to be underfunded. It's hard to get banking funds. You know, they get very little venture capital. So generally speaking, when you're a woman and you're launching, you're probably going to be relying on your savings, on family and friends, and you're going to almost have to really commit to a lean launch. But the positive side of that is a lean launch can really help you when you hit hard times.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have a lot of credit, you don't owe a lot of money to the bank, you know how to manage, very economically. So there can be really an upside to that. But there were many examples in the book of this idea. One entrepreneur we spoke to who launched her company Stroller Strides, which is now very successful. She started with basically nothing. She was a fitness manager. She got the idea for doing exercising, an exercise routine that new moms could do with their children. And so she called her business Stroller Strides. She got the idea, but she had absolutely no money to advertise, nothing. She started by just putting up flyers around her neighborhood to try to get a few people in for a little exercise class with their babies. That's how she started. And she had no money. And what she did was when she needed legal advice, she bartered with one of the moms. She traded fitness, her little fitness lessons for legal advice from another new mom who had a new baby who happened to be a lawyer. So that was kind of one example. One woman who launched a gourmet chocolate business in Chicago, very young, dynamic. She launched it in her early 20s. She basically launched her business by cooking out of her mom's kitchen for 18 months. So she kept her overhead very, very low. And what she would do was she needed a website. She wanted to put up a website. She needed professional photography, but she didn't have the budget to do it. And what she did was she went to a professional photographer and she traded gift baskets that he could give to his clients in return for his doing professional pictures on her website.
So bartering is a huge part of this, whether you're bartering with your parent or someone you know for space or something else for a service that you need.
Exactly. And time and again, there were many, many examples in the book of how women, a lot of it came down to bartering. But it also came down to the issue of when it comes to marketing, do it yourself. Lisa Drugsman, who started Stroller Strides, had no money for advertising. She said, when we started the business, she said, $400 for an ad, to put an ad in a local newspaper. She said, it sounded like $1 million to us because we didn't have a budget. But she was extremely creative about getting coverage for her business when she was launching. And she would get on the phone, she would call producers, she would come up with a little routine, like on Father's Day. When Father's Day was coming up, she would recruit a bunch of dads from her, fitness exercise. She would have them in her studio with the baby. She would call a local TV. They loved it. They would come in and film it. And that's how she built her business. But she never spent a dime on, marketing.
Well, then that's the second one, the media outreach. So we've got bartering and we've got media outreach. And Lisa's such a great story. She's been a guest on the show previously as well. So that's great, the media outreach. And tell us what you discovered, Karin, about women who are just using technology, all the technological tools on the Internet today.
Oh, absolutely. There are two other women in the book who were OBG that I love their story, Laura and Ann. They were OBGYN nurses. They loved the work that they did, but they all had, between them, they had 6 children. Now they have 7, the young children. And their schedules were just crazy, and they decided they wanted to start a home-based business that would allow them to be home for their children while they were young. So they took their background, again, a great lesson, play to your strengths, and they realized, they had been talking with some doctors, and they realized that these doctors were, very stressed, very overworked, and they were constantly having their days interrupted by women who were expecting new babies, who were just anxious and just wanted answers to routine questions. So they launched a business called Exclusively RN, and they made it an Internet-based phone advisory service. And basically, doctors contract with them to, on a retainer basis, to be available to speak to their patients on very basic questions. They started out of their home, the two of them. I think they still work out of their homes in Colorado, and they now have 20 nurses working for them in 6 different states, and they're expanding very rapidly. But they started on about $250, and
Wow.
This new technology, it was this Internet-based phone service, they said was very inexpensive. They had to did a lot of research, and they found that the way this particular service that they used was set up was very economical, and they said it really enabled them to launch the business very inexpensively. And then you have Kathy Kearns, whom we spoke about, who has an Internet-based business, and, the overhead is very low for her, but she can reach people. She has customers all over the world, and she can advertise all over the world. And so the Internet is just a huge enabler, and, a lot of people in the book talked about that.
Yeah. Now, how do you use the Internet in your business? What are your best tips for using technology to grow a business based on your personal experience, Karin?
Well, what would be fun is just to talk about the promoting of the book, because it was really interesting to me. The last book I wrote was another book, but it was about 10 years ago.
Uh-huh.
I started working on this book. And when I worked on that book, the Internet was really just a gleam. No one was really doing anything. And it has been amazing how you can use the Internet as a tool to market a book as an author very inexpensively. You need to put a lot of time in. But, for instance, once the book was published, one of my sisters underwrote a virtual blog tour for me.
All right.
Which was fantastic. There was a woman who has a business. She herself created an Internet business where she scans, she has some universe of blogs that she has compiled and drawn on, and basically you come to her as an author, you say, I have a business book for women, and she tailors a tour for you, and you end up, doing writing and being interviewed over the Internet by various different blogs, and it was incredible. It was so helpful, and, a lot of viral marketing, people would pick up the interviews and see it on one site, and I ended up also through someone that I know, I ended up doing a couple of articles based on the book, just short articles, for a site called Work It Mom, which is the site for moms, but it has a lot of mompreneurs, a lot of women who are also entrepreneurs. So I did a series of articles, and we gave a few of the books away, and they did an interview with me.
Excellent. I love that. That's wonderful. And Work It Mom, for everybody out there, is such a great resource and such a great website. The editor's actually also been on our radio show.
Oh, okay.
Quite a prolific blogger, but that's a great resource. We're going to come back and talk with Karin Abarbanel more about her wonderful new book, Birthing the Elephant, which she co-authored with syndicated business writer Bruce Freeman. This is Indie Business Radio. I'm your host, Donna Maria, and we will be right back.
Want to stay on top of what's new in the radio industry? Sign up for a free subscription to the Future of Talk Radio, available exclusively to listeners of globaltalkradio.com, and find out what's new in the world of online radio. Listeners can find out about new shows and special guests. People with something special to offer can find out how to become a guest and how to prepare for an interview. And prospective hosts will find a valuable resource for everything from planning their new program to selecting topics and guests, recouping expenses by selling advertising, and more. Sign up today for your free subscription to the Future of Talk Radio by visiting www.globaltalkradio.com and learn about the future of talk radio today.
Welcome back to Indie Business Radio. I want to make sure you know about my new media training program aimed squarely at indie business owners. It's the only media training program that I know about that aims itself specifically at very, very small businesses. We're going to be launching in Charlotte, North Carolina in February 2009 at themediaisyou.com. We've got several cities to follow. There's early bird pricing for this great seminar, really designed to specifically roll up our sleeves together, get on the Internet, and begin to accept the fact that you are the best spokesperson for your business, and we're going to show you how to do that. Check out themediaisyou.com for registration details and other information. We are talking today with Karin Abarbanel, co-author of Birthing the Elephant. And Karin, before we took our break, we were talking about some women that you featured in the book and some experiences they had. And so I want you to tell us a little bit too, Karin, about some of the important lessons and takeaways that you have learned from your small business experience as well.
Okay, great. There are lots of lessons learned, I think, in the book. It's really an action guide. So picking a couple was a challenge, but I did come up with a few. And I think one of the first ones is, go for a lean launch, definitely. I think it is possible to take that substitute brains for bucks approach. And if you do that in the very beginning of your launch, I think it will really make it more cost-effective. It'll be less stressful for you. You can reach out, get advice from other entrepreneurs, brainstorm about ideas to do that. But it's really, really important to, kind of keep the costs to a point where you have some comfort level with the budget that you're using, and figure out a budget that works for you, works for your family, and then really make up your mind to stay with that.
Now, Karin, practically speaking, when you talk about a budget, did you notice that the women you featured in your book really did have, like, a budget when they started their businesses, or was it just, I'm going to stay lean and spend it when I have to, as kind of...
I think a lot of them did. I mean, I think of one woman, Patricia's Yarns, Trish Scribner, who's launched her business. She and her husband basically, they took some of their savings, a modest amount, and then they borrowed money from their family. They actually put together a business plan, a marketing plan, and presented it to their family. And I guess on both sides they launched. But they launched with, I believe it was $30,000. She was opening a retail space, so she needed to, have inventory and rent the space. So there were some issues there, but most people told her, you need $150,000 and many more square feet to make your business successful. But she realized, we don't have that. This is what we have. We're going to make it work. They found a space to rent. They fixed it all up themselves. Her husband, Adam, was a teacher. He spent a summer painting, renovating the place. She got her dad to build shelves, so she stayed within that budget. And a lot of people did that. So some people really did decide, this is the money I have to work with, and I'm going to make it work. I think a second tip, along with lean launch, another real lesson that came out of the book is this idea of don't overspend on image. We all want, we're launching, you want to feel big, you want to feel important, you want to have, that latest computer equipment, you want to have the fancy website, whatever. You can spend a lot of money on things like that don't really contribute to your bottom line, and it's very easy to do. So be very, very careful about how you use those startup dollars, and don't confuse image with professionalism. Professionalism is, working with your clients, delivering high quality, giving them what they want when they want it. And they don't really care about your office or what your website looks like, as long as it's reasonably professional. So just be very careful not to overspend on image. That's a big pitfall of startup.
Right. And Karin, I see that frequently coming out of the box with, bells and whistles and blinking things and fancy technological flash tools on the website, which actually dazzle people for about 3 seconds.
Exactly.
And then when they come back to your website, it's almost like, do I have to go through this again to get what I want, what I'm looking for here?
Right. You can start with a very minimal website that looks professional.
Or even just a blog today. You can start with a blog.
Exactly. Yeah. You can start with a blog. And that's a big issue because, you could spend a lot of money right up front to do, your web activity if you're going to be, sell over the Internet. And it
Right.
can be a real black hole, so you want to be very careful about that. Then I think the third point that I would mention, the third real lesson that a lot of people talked about is you need to really somehow go for this idea of guerrilla marketing. I'm thrilled to hear about this wonderful program that you're doing, Donna Maria, because you are so right. Again and again, we heard from people, you are your own best marketer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of people will spend money, again, that they don't need to spend upfront, dollars that are really precious on advertising or, public relations, hiring someone professional to do that for them, when they could really, if they put in the time and mastered some basic, marketing skills, they could do it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a huge, again, it can be a huge money drain. And again, you're going to learn so much more about your business if you're out there promoting it. And marketing is really, I would say, the Achilles heel of small business owners. If I were to pick one thing, a lot of people just don't feel comfortable with it. But one woman in the book said, whatever business you're in, you're not really in that business. You're in the business of marketing your business.
That is, I love that. And
isn't that great?
I did a blog post this weekend called Your New Career Publisher.
Right.
Because you've got to be out there sharing this information with people. And I love your example, Karin, of what you did with your book. You had your was it your sister to set up a blog tour for you?
Yeah, and it is so amazing what you can do yourself. And
yeah.
I called people, that I didn't know. And the other thing I would also say that really came through as just a huge message, and I have really used this myself in marketing this book, is tell everyone you know what you're doing. I mean, I can't tell you how many people have come to me. I had a neighbor who got me on Smart Money TV, because she worked for Smart Money. She couldn't do an article in the book, but she gave my name to someone who was doing their video reports, and I ended up doing a report. And she's just someone I know from dog walking.
And it's just because you happened to mention what you were doing.
Yeah. I knew she was a magazine person, and I have gotten so many leads from people that I know that I had no idea. They had a neighbor who, ran a website, or, someone I know put me in touch with a divorce site on the Internet. She had a friend who was doing that, and I ended up doing a couple of articles on launching if, you're newly single. You just don't know who people know, so you need to just tell everybody about what you're doing. That's probably the number one marketing tip, right? I mean, wouldn't you say, Donna Maria?
Well, I think so. And, so tell us this then. I wonder how many women that you talk to, because you deal with these kinds of women all the time, not just in your book, in your business. How many times do you deal with the sort of, well, I really, I'm not the best marketer for myself. I'm kind of shy. I don't like to brag. Do you hear that sometimes, Karin?
I do, actually. I hear that from people. And I think the answer to that is, get over it. If you're in business, you're going to need to really do that. And I think you need to think about maybe we need to reframe what marketing is. It's not bragging. It's really communicating. It's sharing what you have to offer with people. And I think when I think about marketing this book, it's not always easy. I'm a writer. I sit in my office. I'm sort of an introspective person, to get out there and be promoting it. But I keep thinking, I put a tremendous amount of energy in this book. I love the people I interviewed. They have so much to share. This would be so helpful to women. I need to let them know about it. And that is sort of what I use. I use my sense of mission about sharing what I feel is very valuable startup information to sort of ignite my ability to get out there. And that helps me pick up the phone and call someone, that I don't know and tell them about the book. And I think we need to just, get in touch with that motivation, that sense of mission, that passion. And I think that's what you need to fuel your marketing. And, people talked about that again and again. Bobby Brown, had a great thing in the book where she was, just designed, she started by just working with someone to design one lipstick. And then she designed, a number of them. And she was at a party, and she was so excited about these new lipsticks that she was creating that she was just talking to everybody. And it turned out that one woman she talked to was a buyer for Bergdorf Goodman. And And she got so excited about it that she ended up giving Bobby a table in Bergdorf Goodman, and that's how she really launched her business. And Bobby said, I didn't know anything about marketing or PR, but I guess I was doing marketing and PR. I was just talking about how excited I was.
Right, and that is so contagious. It's funny that you mentioned that too, because I was talking with another guest on the show a while back. She has a big cosmetics company now, but she started in her kitchen, and she said one day she was invited to be on a little teeny tiny cable show in her hometown, and she was exhausted. She had 2 young children, hadn't fixed dinner. It was pouring down rain outside, and she had been invited to come and give a class on how to make sugar scrubs or something and on the show, and she just almost canceled because they called her and they said, the subways we've got problems everywhere, you don't have to come. And she said, you know what, I'm going to drag myself there. And a producer from the Oprah show was watching.
Oh, all right. Don't you love it?
Right. Well, and that's just the thing. It's what you're saying. It's about showing up. It's about putting it out there.
Right.
And seizing those opportunities when they come your way.
I mean, that is so true. And time and again, people in the book talked about that. And it's sort of, again, it's this idea I think we need, especially as women, you need to sort of disconnect the idea of marketing from bragging or promoting yourself, because it's really not about you. It's about your service. It's about your product. It's about something of value that would benefit people. And I think it's
how you're helping other people.
Yes, exactly. You are helping other people. I mean, when Kathy Kearns talks about her style sticks, she said, I'm really helping women, feel better about the fact that they're not as mobile as they were. I'm creating these fashionable sticks that sort of match people's outfits so that if they have to use a cane, they think of it not as, proof of their disability, but as a sort of a fashion statement. So she transformed it into something else. And so she's very committed to, helping women feel better about themselves in a tough situation. And I think that sort of overcomes your shyness and I think if you can get in touch with that passion and that sense of purpose and mission, you can think differently about marketing. And I think that's the challenge.
So what fun. I'm on stylestick.com right now, Karin.
Yeah.
See why you featured her in Birthing the Elephant. I mean, I'm going, I don't need a cape, but I'm going to get one of these.
Yeah. It's just such a fun idea, and and it's so creative, and it really took again a tough situation and turned it into something really helpful to people. And
look at this, she's even doing manufacturing for colleges and universities, sororities and fraternities. So starting small. I mean, I would imagine, Karin, that it never occurred to her that would be a market, but she's out there, and I guess customers started asking for it, and then they kind of tell you what to do next, don't they?
Exactly. I mean, that's a whole section of the book. We have one of the interesting things that makes this book, I believe, really unique is we really map the launch cycle over 22 months of a startup, and we take you through 4 stages that sort of emerge from our discussing with people. And one of the stages is kind of, the last stage is really the market finds you, and it tells you what it needs. And
the market finds you, and obviously it's not going to find you if you're not out there.
Right, exactly. But once you're launching your business, it's an organic process. The business kind of takes on a life of its own, and it tells you what you need, and you often end up doing something very different or having a very different audience from where you started. Just a great little short story about that. Ronnie Fliss, who started Fat Murray's Doggy Treats. She was in financial services for 30 years, got axed, and launched this gourmet treat business for dogs. And she said when she got out there and started talking to pet owners, she just had some very basic products. But then she found out that dog owners, of course they love their dogs, but they love to get them treats for holidays.
Right.
She said, I never knew this. I never thought about it. So she ended up doing Halloween treats, birthday treats for a dog, a bone with a birthday candle in it, Christmas treats. She does things at the shore, so she created little treats, shaped like shells. And she said it was amazing how people responded to that, and she started selling so much more. But she said it was really the market telling her, holidays are big for dog owners. We like to treat ours, So she started creating products that met that market need. And that's kind of the way it works, but you don't know that if you're not out there talking to people and talking about your product.
Well, Karin, we've almost come to the end of our time together today, believe it or not. Can you share with listeners some of your final encouraging thoughts on business success in today's tough economic times?
Yes, absolutely. This is a big issue, and as you can imagine, in some ways there's a lot of interest in the book just because many people may be facing layoff situations and may be thinking about small business as an option. And I guess what I would say that I think is most helpful that someone said to me once is, it's always the perfect time to launch a business, and it's never the perfect time. You're always going to feel you could have more money, you could have more expertise, whatever. But if you have a burning desire, real passion to launch something, as long as, again, you really have a lean launch, now can actually, in a tough economy, can actually be a good time, ironically, to launch. Because there's, people are looking for innovation. They're looking for new things. There's a lot more outsourcing. So if you have a service you can offer, businesses may be looking to keep their staff lean and, be outsourcing. That can create opportunities for new business owners. So I think we need to look at what's happening with the economy and just say, you know what, if I've got this idea and I think it can work, I'm going to run with it, even though it's a tough economy. And I was just at a big business conference, actually, recently. There were a small business conference, and a lot of people, and of course the economy was a big issue. And it was very inspiring because we had Liz Lang spoke, and she's one of the people we interviewed in the book, and she's just wonderful. And she gave such an uplifting talk about how if you've got this passion,
wow,
you can make it work in spite of the economy, and you can start small, and you can be very creative and get out there and market. I mean, she had no money to market also.
Well, and that goes back to one of your points about being creative. And unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap up, but I want to encourage you to get Birthing the Elephant, The Woman's Go For It Guide to Overcoming the Big Challenges of Launching a Business by Karin Abarbanel and Bruce Freeman. And really quickly, Karin, your website address?
Actually, the website address is just www.birthingtheelephant.com.
How easy is that? Get over there, Indies, and get it. We got a great show coming up next week, but my editor's telling me we don't have time to tell you about it. Please join us, indiebusinessradio.com, 1 o'clock p.m. next Monday. In the meantime, enjoy your life, build your business, and have your way.
You're listening to GlobalTalkRadio.com.